There is an omnipresent force, omnipresent, omniscient. You can call it the universe, you can call it divine intelligence, whatever you want, but we are expressions and extensions of that. Greetings, friends. I am Jim Blake, author of The Zen Executive, and this is your superior self.
Oh, coming in strong. Reverend Jim Blake, my friend, thank you for taking the time. I'm very excited about this. You're the author of the new book, The Zen Executive, bringing in the Zen tradition into the business world. Thank you so much for writing this book. Thank you for taking the time.
My pleasure. Honored to be with you, sir.
So let's talk about this, right? Like, your journey is very interesting. Your current position is you are the CEO of the Unity folks over there. But how did that happen, right? Like, I feel like you were there before you were at Unity, left Unity, and then came back to Unity. So some people don't know what Unity is. Yep. I just happen to know what it is. Discuss that. First, what is Unity?
Yep.
And how did you come back to it?
Okay, so Unity is well, I guess it's referred to as under what is called the New Thought umbrella. So in the late 1800s, a movement began under the description of New Thought. And it involves various traditions that you may or may not have heard of. Unity is one. Another is called Centers for Spiritual Living. If you've heard of Reverend Dr. Michael Beckwith and his Agape Center, that sits under the umbrella of New Thought. And really the idea here is it focuses on the idea that our thoughts and emotions create our experience of life. There's a good deal in each tradition about meditation and prayer and how that helps you connect with the divine intelligence within, and that there is an infinite intelligence or energy or God or whatever word you're comfortable with that underlies all of creation, and we are expressions of that divine intelligence. And so each of these traditions has their unique founders, but they largely teach those same universal principles. And so Unity World Headquarters, where I'm at, sits on about a 1,200-acre campus that just turned 100 years old 2 years ago. The movement itself is over 100 years old. It is a non-denominational set of universal principles that can be applied to your daily life. And so the work that is done here is there are magazines that are published. There's a daily devotional called Daily Word that is 95 plus years old, has about 500,000 subscribers. There's a publishing arm that publishes books and booklets on everything from addiction to grief, prosperity, becoming a caregiver, end of life, how to handle end of life from a spiritual perspective. So it's basically a large collection of tools and resources on the web and in all sorts of media that are designed to help you cope with the daily struggles of life. And so, as I mentioned, very large campus, and that's what Unity is all about, and it sits under this umbrella of New Thought. And we do everything that I mentioned earlier, as well as retreats and events on this campus. It is an Italian-style architecture. It has a state-of-the-art hotel and conference center, a golf course, a couple of fishing lakes, and some walking trails, and it's really a beautiful place to serve.
I have been reading Lessons in Truth.
Oh, wow, yeah.
That has been pivotal in my development, right? My spiritual development.
That's Emily Cady, right?
Yep, that is. I think this was written in, I'm looking at the book. Is this first published in 1894?
Yeah, is that right? It's considered a Unity classic. Yes, she was a Unity minister and part of the Unity movement, and it is considered a Unity classic. She was one of the foremost teachers of Unity principle. And I mentioned earlier sort of the principles that are there. The reason the founders gave this movement the name Unity is because they believe they found universal truths in mostly all of the world's spiritual religions. And so they brought them all together under this umbrella of unity. And so, yeah, Emily Cady is a classic, legendary teacher in the unity movement.
So did you naturally attract to this type of teachings, or what was your previous, I guess, religious religion, or however you want to word that?
Yeah, so great question. So um, I didn't grow up in a particularly religious family, really lower middle class, and the only thing my family was religious about was putting me on the Sunday school bus every Sunday to go to a Baptist Sunday school. And so my first experience of religion was largely, conservative and fire and brimstone and relatively scary for a person of 7 or 8 years old in terms of what they were teaching. And so once I aged out of those programs, my family nor I really attended much in terms of religious services. However, I always felt this connection to something bigger than me. And it wasn't really until college, when I had my first world religions course, that my mind was sort of just blown wide open. I really was fascinated by all the different world religions and how each of them had different expressions of God and what that was like. And so it was then that I really just became a seeker. So then I couldn't learn enough. And so I studied a handful of the different world religions. And then I met a young lady in the late 1990s who was from Arizona. So she was from Sedona. And so she had been exposed to all of these new age type things, energy work and quantum physics and what all that means and how it works. And so I just became a sponge, and she started introducing me to all kinds of material. The first and probably most profound book I read was The Celestine Prophecy. It really gave me some insight and aligned with kind of how I thought the universe worked. And so it made a lot of sense for me. And that was really the first eye-opening book. And then just since then, I've done it all. I studied Buddhism, I studied Hinduism. I have a pretty healthy yoga practice. And so I studied the 8-limb path of yoga. Obviously, I'm pretty well versed. I have a master's in divinity, so I'm pretty well versed in the Christian tradition. And for me personally, I just sort of merge all that together in this way of life that some people can call Zen, which is not really related to the Mahayana Zen Buddhist practice, but more think of it as a noun in terms of just a way to bring peace and calm to everything that you do, if you will.
Mm. I love all of that. So I've been highlighting like crazy in this book, right? Lessons in Truth. What, for the people that haven't read it, right?
Yep.
And this is so key for me. What is man's relationship to God when it comes to Unity's teachings?
Yeah. So basically, you're going to find this in Katie's book and everywhere else. And I mentioned it earlier. So there is an omnipresent force, omnipresent, omniscient. You can call it the universe, you can call it divine intelligence, whatever you want. But we are expressions and extensions of that. And therefore, we are inherently divine ourselves. And so, unity and New Thought does not teach that folks are born in the idea of sin, and that they're unworthy, but rather you're an expression of the divine. And each and every one of us is a completely unique expression of the divine with our own set of gifts that we bring to the world. And so the more that we can use a spiritual practice of some kind to get in touch with that divine, and then use things like affirmations and denials to control our thoughts and emotions in terms of how we experience life. And so, and even some of that overlaps with the Buddhist tradition. So if you look at the Buddhist tradition, where they talk about the idea of suffering, and we create our own suffering by spiraling in our thoughts and emotions, right? And so you use tools like affirmations and things to change your thoughts and to break that spiral and to begin to create a new path forward versus the old sort of stinking thinking, if you will. So I hope that answers your questions. I went a little bit beyond the nature of God, but I hope that was helpful.
It was perfect. So essentially, we are a piece of that. We are are we God? Are we God having a human experience?
you are an expression of God having a human experience. And some people who have been studying the tradition, and depending on which tradition, they believe that we are an expression of God that is experiencing itself, which is sort of how we came into being. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So is it to have that experiential realization of self, like as far as like that latter part that you were talking about, if that's really, I mean, and I know these are some deep questions. I'm just,
Sure.
I find it fascinating that there is the teachings, Unity is putting these teachings out because I grew up Methodist, right, and converted to Catholicism,
right,
and any of these ideas would be called blasphemy. Like, people are very, I don't know what the word is, like, to even think that they are a fractal of God. They feel weird about it. They I don't know if it's guilt. I mean, I at first I was like, no way, come on, no way, no way. But I mean, the more that I read the teachings and the more that I meditate, the more these big truths feel real to me, if that makes sense.
yeah, and that's how it happened for me. It sort of resonates with how you came into the world. Really, you can sort of feel it resonating with your being, that you sort of believe this is how the universe works. And so, yes, the idea is this omnipresent force that is behind the creation of everything. Squirrels, birds, plants, trees, they're all expressions of the divine, just in different forms. And so the reason that is such a powerful teaching, and I know it, and growing up in that Baptist environment that I talked about, it took me a really long time to get my head around that. But I can tell you that it was life-changing for me, because what it led me to was a path of self-acceptance and a path of worthiness. And so it was a change in lens for me. I had this whole new sense of worthiness. In fact, co-founder Myrtle Fillmore is one of her quotes is, she is a divine child of God. Therefore, we do not inherit sickness. Inherit sickness doesn't mean we won't get sick, doesn't mean you won't have problems, but you don't inherit it. And so this idea of being connected to and a part of the divine can really powerfully shift how you experience yourself and how you think of yourself and how you experience the world. And so and I'm glad to hear you talk about meditation and prayer, because that's the space, anything that gets you to stillness. Meditation works for me. But what I would say is there's no right or wrong way to meditate. Believe me, when I started, I wanted to do it perfectly. So I read like 70 books on meditation. And what I've learned over the years is it's whatever that gets you to that place of stillness where you can quiet the chattering mind to create a space so you can lean away from thought, to create a space for inspiration and guidance. For some people, that's exercise. Others, they can find it on the yoga mat. Some people find it on a nature walk or just sitting outside. Whatever that is for you, I just encourage you to find that place, because once you can create a space for inspiration and guidance to show up, all sorts of things start to shift in your experience. You start to see possibilities you didn't necessarily see before. Coincidences begin to happen. And it's all because you've created a space or a pause in this chattering mind and created a space for inspiration and guidance. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. When you realize this, right? Like when you have this realization that we are divine beings, that we are a part of that.
Yep.
Does that empower you to have more control or to change your life and make it the way that you want?
So one of two things happen, Trey, and it gets really interesting. And this is part of why it's a spiritual journey. So you either become really empowered and feel like all of a sudden, wow, I now understand that I'm this expression and that I can control my own experience by changing my thoughts and my emotions around the things that show up before me. I don't have to suffer and be angry for 5 hours about this. I can move to a place of acceptance and change my thinking to, something positive is going to come out of this. So it's really empowering from that standpoint. Or people become immediately frightened because now you are basically responsible. You can't sort of abdicate your authority to a God outside of you, or this unknown force that some people have discerned wreaks havoc in the world and in our lives. And so there's a great deal of personal responsibility there that you sort of have to make peace with, and you sort of have to understand that that you can and sometimes do create your own suffering just by how you show up in life, in terms of how you interpret the events that show up in your life. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So instead of life happening to you, life is happening through you.
Exactly.
Yeah. How do you so how do you teach people to be empowered in that, right? Thoughts create reality, right? Not just in physical matter, but emotional perception too, right?
Yeah. And so it really becomes, people have to experience it. So I'll give you an example. If you walk through life and you just generally, your posture in life is, I'm an unlucky dude. And so every time something happens, you go, yep, see right there, I'm unlucky. So what you've done is you've drawn a conclusion. And now all you do your entire life is you gather evidence and you interpret every event to fit that conclusion. So you've created this ceiling for yourself that everything you see that happens is some form of bad luck. Versus if you go through life and think, hey, the universe is a benevolent universe and I am blessed and supported and I move through life with ease and grace. Even when difficult things happen, you don't necessarily see them as difficult. You see them as, wow, this has shown up. What can I learn from this? Or maybe this is guiding me in a different direction. Or so you interpret things completely different because you have a completely different viewpoint. And instead of drawing a conclusion that everything is bad and because of your bad luck, you are walking around with this posture that everything that is happening is guiding you towards something greater. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
That's a big example of a posture in life, but you can do that with anything. And it's sort of how, you're driving to work in the morning and you get a flat tire and it's awful. You're going to be late to this really important meeting you had. And so now you're spending your entire morning, probably the whole day, frustrated and angry that this happened because you're late to every meeting and everything is negative and you just spiral and spiral and spiral. And oh, by the way, you're interacting with people during that day. So who knows how you're showing up, because you're showing up from this place of frustration and anger. And oh, by the way, you're probably making some decisions. And I think we've all had an experience where we make a decision in a state of emotion. It typically is not really, it doesn't render our best decision making, right?
Mm-hmm.
Versus if you can somehow shift and go, okay, this flat tire happened. I'm frustrated, I'm angry, I'm going to feel that. Now I'm going to move to this place of acceptance. And I'm gonna just choose to think that this is somehow going to turn out okay. It doesn't have to be great. Not anything wonderful has happened here, but I'm just neutral about the fact that this happened. Now, when you move through the day, you don't have that frustration. You don't have that anger. You're not making poor decisions out of emotion, and you're not suffering for the next 8 hours. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right.
What do your services look like? I mean, that's got to be interesting.
Well, so it depends. So all of these principles, the founders, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, co-founders, they rooted these teachings in Christianity. And the reason they did that is because it was predominantly the religion of the West. If unity had been founded in the East, it would have been rooted in Hinduism or maybe rooted in Buddhism. And so using these principles, it gives you a different way to look at sort of the teachings. And so, for instance, unity doesn't teach that Jesus came here as a savior to save us from our sins, but rather Jesus came here as a way shower. And so the things that he taught and the things that he did, we also have the capacity to do. What he was teaching us is how he was expressing how he is connected to the Father and how we can also be connected to the quote unquote Father. I don't like to necessarily use that gender specific language, but it's how it was taught in Christianity. And so when you look at things like the kingdom of heaven is at hand and sayings like that Christ put forth, you begin to understand what he's talking about is we create our own experience of what's happening right now. So heaven is here and now. When he says heaven is here on earth, that's what he's talking about. It's you're using your thoughts and emotions to create an experience of satisfaction and joy rather than suffering.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there is a hell then?
Unity does not teach that there is a concept of hell. No. In fact, sin is not necessarily a sin against God. Sin, as it's taught in New Thought, is error thinking. So your sin is you're going down that path of negative thinking, which creates the suffering.
Hmm. That's interesting. Yeah. I think that hell is a state of mind. I think,
That's
what was
it
it?
right
Some
there.
old parable about, there was like this, I don't want a guru or something traveling on a horse, and somebody, the king came up to the guru or the wise man, and he was like basically saying, um, try to give him enlightenment. And he was like, you know, basically stating that the hell and the heaven is your state of mind, right? And the king didn't want to hear that. But I'm totally forgetting about that entire parable right now because like it's been such a long time since I talked about it. But I do believe that there is no hell. I think that your mindset, like we create our hells here every day. I mean, look at today's society and what we're going through.
Right.
That's hell. That's hell on earth. I mean, but also heaven can be a state of mind as well. I mean, if you do the things that are intrinsically going to grow you spiritually, I find that you can find that, and that as you grow and develop that consciousness, things don't bother you the same way. Maybe you're vibrating differently. Maybe you're just kind of, you're moving away from those lower consciousness states. But I don't know. What are your thoughts?
No, you're spot on. So what happens is these teachings, a lot of people go, oh, that's positive spirituality. And so you just make everything positive, and it's spiritual bypass, it's this, that, or the other. It's not true. The teachings aren't saying that bad things aren't going to happen. What they're saying is you get to choose how you experience the things that happen in life. You get to choose through your thoughts and emotions and actions how you move through that experience. It doesn't mean we're not going to experience sadness and we're not going to experience tragedy, but the depth and quality of that experience is determined by our thoughts and responses to that, which shows up.
Hmm. Um, how did your, I don't know your background, so I don't, how did your family accept this new idea, right? Like that, I don't know, if your family are all members of Unity, I would assume so, but like
Yeah.
your family, like, were they accepting of this?
As I mentioned, I didn't have a very religious family. And so I think many of them were shocked when I began to, talk about these spiritual concepts and stuff. And many of them just didn't have an interest in it. They didn't understand it and didn't really have a desire to understand it. And in New Thought, we don't really do the idea of proselytizing. So we when people ask us or they're looking for resources, they want to learn more, we certainly point them to books like Emily Cady and Charles Fillmore and a number of more modern texts that help teach these principles. But my family, I would say, was just sort of really accepting in terms of whatever I wanted to do. They didn't necessarily want to dig into it and understand it. I think my mother and my stepfather, when he was alive, sort of thought that this was rooted in that more conservative Christian belief system. Some of my younger relatives understood it to be something different, but didn't really delve much beyond
Mm-hmm.
that. They just respected me and loved me and appreciated that if it was making me happy, then so be it.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome, man. So how do you take this philosophy and you apply it to business? Because we need more of this philosophy in business.
Yeah, so in the book, I talk about the different ways that you can sort of bring these ideas and methodologies into your work. So really, honestly, Trey, any task can be made spiritual. Mowing the lawn, washing the dishes. It's really the thoughts and emotions that you put behind it and the presence you put behind whatever it is you're doing. And so I think in this country, for so long, we have been taught to compartmentalize our spiritual self, and our church going self and religious self goes over here. And then our corporate and business self goes over here. And what I'm suggesting is it's okay to merge those two. It's okay to bring a spirit of compassion and empathy and service to everything you're doing at work. You don't have to be overt about it, but just again, establishing that mindset behind everything you do sort of changes the meaning of the tasks that are before you. And then more specifically, when you look at things like a mission statement, earlier you heard me talk about affirmations. Affirmations are tools that we use to sort of change our thinking or to change our mindset. So we're affirming something different or better to get us out of maybe a negative spiral. A mission statement is nothing but a group affirmation. And what's really powerful about it is if it's short and compelling and it's sort of come from the ground up, so you've got a lot of ownership and buy-in, that group affirmation becomes this collective consciousness. And so now you've got an entire organization that is moved and inspired by this one statement. And so it can be really powerful in terms of informing your culture, informing your work, and even informing your decision making. If it's compelling enough, you can use it as a guiding principle. So before you make, big decisions or changes in direction, you can go back and say, hey, does this support our mission? Is this in support? Is this direction in support of our mission and what we're trying to do in the world? And so you can really use a mission statement as this collective affirmation that creates something bigger than the individuals and that everyone can strive for. That makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's probably easier said than done at Unity, right? Like everybody's on the same page. But when it comes to outside CEOs, are they accepting of this philosophy?
Yeah, I don't think they'll go as deep as we have gone here early in this conversation. But I think that you can put these things in secular terms. And so, for instance, another way that I used affirmations so you're right, I was here from 2006 to 2011 as the CIO and vice president of operations. And then I got called away to go work for a global leading energy management company. And it was an opportunity I just couldn't turn away from because I always wanted to work for a global leader and really understand what makes a global leader a global leader. I was concerned because I had learned to lead this way with sort of these principles, and you could talk openly about them here and it would be okay. Everyone understood directionally where you were headed. So my challenge was, how do I put some of this stuff in practice? Because I know it works in the secular corporate world. And so basically I cloaked these ideas in secular terms and in PowerPoints and was able to achieve the same success. So the organization that I went to, they had a particular support center and support team. So it was customer service for all of North America. And they had lost some confidence and were really struggling. And so I knew I'm going to have to make a whole lot of changes to this going in. So one of the first affirmations I created with this team is change is our friend. Why did I do that? Because people will create their own suffering around change, right? It's the only constant in the universe. It's prevalent everywhere. And for some reason, we as humans resist it. And so I wanted to sort of set the stage that we were going to make change our friend. We're going to do a lot of changing. And just by saying that over and over in meetings, change is our friend. Over time, it became a joke with people, but it really opened up the culture to be innovative and creative and move through change really easily and effortlessly. So that's a way where I brought this spiritual practice of affirmation into the corporate world. Another way is I would use silly little sayings. So for instance, if we're in a meeting and people are going particularly negative, I would bring this, and you'll get a kick out of this, but it's a little saying that I use that says, your mind is a garden, your thoughts are the seeds. You can grow flowers or you can grow weeds. And I would say it and people would giggle and sort of laugh about it. But I can tell you this, months down the road, if someone in a meeting was going down this negative path and really seeing the glass as half empty, someone else would chime in. They started using the tools themselves and say, hey man, you're bringing a lot of weeds to the discussion. How can we turn this more positive? How can we see this in a different light? And so again, simple sort of secular tools framed in secular terms that had people really practicing principle right there in the office.
I love that. I love how you have like these bold quotes in the book too. Like just for instance, it is tremendously helpful to know your own perception, biases, and triggers. Yes, 100%. Because in the work world, a lot of the work world, that's just kind of covered up. Nobody really talks about that. They feel like they have to be separate, like you were talking about.
Yeah, and what happens is when you lack self-awareness, you sort of miss the opportunity to understand the really powerful impact each one of us can have, whether you're a leader or an individual. And so what I mean by that is I'll start at the leadership level. So if I am a leader who leads through fear and intimidation, that means everyone on my team is likely serving in a space of fear and anxiety. They're not going to bring me new ideas because they're afraid they're going to be dumb and they're going to get chastised. They're afraid to make a mistake. They're constantly anxious and stressed out. So let's just pause right there. How well do you think they're performing every day in that particular state? How healthy do you think they are to be in this constant state of stress and struggle? Here's the most powerful part that we overlook. They don't leave that at the office. That goes home with them. It impacts how they show up with their family, their friends, their pets, their children, how they show up on the road on the way home, right? Because again, you're now making decisions from this unsteady emotional state of stress and anxiety versus you apply a different leadership style, one that employs compassion and empathy and understanding and inspiration instead of intimidation. Now your associates feel seen, they feel heard, they feel supported, they feel uplifted, they feel safe to bring you new ideas. And so what happens? Now they're in this environment, they feel uplifted. That person is far, far, far more productive during your office hours than the person who's completely stressed out. And oh, by the way, when they leave the office, the ripple effect that they're having in the world is one of a positive nature versus the negative one that we described earlier. And I think it's sometimes lost on leaders and individuals how significant that impact is that we can have on the people that serve with us.
Amen. 100%. And then another one that I really liked. We needed to change our culture so everyone felt seen, heard, and appreciated for who they were.
Yeah, and so you hear a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, and we really started this work back in 2016, a couple of years before it really became a topic of the mainstream. But I can't tell you how there. First of all, there's two paths that I take in the book: the altruistic path in terms of what you get socially from having a more diverse workforce and having diversity in the workforce, and then I apply basically a whole set of data and studies that talk about how much more productive organizations are, how much more successful they are, how sales are higher when you have this diverse workforce. And so what you're talking about here is the idea that anyone who wants to serve in your organization can see themselves. First of all, they need to see themselves in your organization so that they can feel safe. Then once they're there, they need to feel accepted. Well, how do you make someone feel accepted? Well, you make them feel seen, you make them feel heard, you give them a seat at the table, you have deep and meaningful dialogue, you do deep listening, just like you would with anyone else in the world. And when you do that, you end up creating this community of people who really, really feel like they're all connected and moving in the same direction, and everyone has a sense of self-worth, and it is really powerful in terms of solidifying a culture and engagement.
I love that. Engagement. I kind of feel like unity. There's got to be a lot of engagement there, right? Give us like a day in the life of the CEO of Unity.
Well, the very first thing we do as an executive team, and this is basically, Trey, a result of the pandemic, but we meet every single morning at 8:30 a.m. as an executive team, and we basically just touch base. And that was largely how we responded and managed our way through the pandemic, because everything was changing and in motion all the time in terms of new rulings and guidelines in terms of how we were to handle that with not only the people we serve but our associates. So we still do that every single day. But I spend a lot of time personally engaging with donors, looking for new partnerships, and working on the long-term strategic direction of what we're trying to do here. And so I spend a good amount of time in new product development and sort of directionally where are we headed for the next 1 to 3 years. So that involves a lot of meetings. It involves a lot of really great discussions, a lot of brainstorming. And the mission that we have here at Unity, we talked about mission statement earlier, but ours is to help and serve more people through prayer, publishing, and community. And so I spend a lot of time focusing on that mission and understanding how can we bring the latest innovation to each of those areas of focus. Those are our core competencies. We want to innovate around them. And so how do we do that? How do we, reach the next generation? How do we reach and find more people to help and serve? So it's a lot of strategic endeavors, if you will.
I mean, you got your hand. I mean, Unity has its hand in everything. I think you have Unity books, you have Unity radio. How do you reach that next generation, right? Like how have you found to be best connected with the next generation coming up?
So, Trey, given that I am a former IT person, we base a lot of our decision making and strategy on data and data analysis. And so we have done a ton of market research and research on the different demographics we serve. And what I will tell you is, I'm not convinced, and we're not convinced as a leadership team right now, that there is a clear path and clear way to reach the younger generation. So I'm going to say under 30. Unless they sort of grow up around these teachings and are familiar with it, it's difficult to reach them. There's a certain level of maturity, emotional intelligence, and life experiences one has to have before they sort of begin to explore what they believe and explore teachings like ours. And so rather than try to fashion different languages and tools and channels to reach a younger demographic, we sort of focus on, 30 years of age and older. And every day someone turns 30, 40, and 50. And we have just found that there's the majority of the people that are seeking transformation in life start around that age. And so we just continue to cater and tailor to that group for right now. At some point, a clear strategy may emerge for how we do reach the younger generation, because there are principles in these teachings around, handling your thoughts and emotions that we think could be very helpful. There's just no clear path for how to do that quite yet.
Mm-hmm. You might have to get on TikTok.
We just got on TikTok, so we're navigating our way through that. So we're certainly on all the different social media channels. And I will say that our website and web traffic at unity.org is skewing way younger. So we are actually the fastest growing demographic on our website is age 25 to 34 right now.
Yeah, I think your philosophy touches a lot of people. I think it hits on big truth, and I think our younger generation, I think they're getting away from the traditional dogmas because it's not doing the job, right? We have this innate curiosity of who we are, right? And I think that your teachings hit on a lot of those points, and it feels right. I've never been to a service, but I have talked to some Unity pastors, and their philosophies are like right in line with mine. It might not be all the same, right, but it just resonates with you, right? Like, when big truth, like when you're hitting on it, because you find this resonating feeling inside of you, right? And I always go to my heart center, because that's what I feel is my compass, is my true north. And if I visualize my heart, and it might sound a little silly, but I envision it as a flame, right? And I ask my heart, is this true? Is this true for me? And I envision that flame and what it looks like. And if it's a small flame, then maybe not. If it's a huge engulfing flame, then yes, that is truth. And a lot of the literature that I've read that it has come out of Unity has been this huge flame. So for me, it's resonating at a spiritual level. It is pushing me down that path of growth and spiritual enlightenment. And I hope my goal is to really pass this knowledge on to the younger generation, because they are our future. And I feel like, there was some crazy statistic that I think it was Neil Donald Walsh he wrote in his new book that like 85% of the world believes in a higher power. And I'm like, well, if 85% of the world believes in a higher power, why do we still have all this chaos, right? Like in this world. So I feel like they're just all hitting on different notes. Like, I feel like there's a common thread that runs between all of them. And what Unity is teaching is that common thread. So if we can like teach these principles to the younger generation, maybe we can get a handle on the chaos that's happening right now.
And what I think the key to that, Trey, is a lot like what we talked about earlier around the diversity topic. I think the more younger people that begin to embrace and understand these teachings, and then they can take them to their generation, that's where the success will come.
Mm-hmm.
But when you have, as you mentioned, people running away from the dogma of traditional religion and the hypocrisy and the controversy, anything that's shrouded in or even next to spiritual, people are leery of, especially the younger generation. The fastest growing demographic, religious demographic in the world is non-affiliated, what they call nuns. It is outpaced every other religion now. It's also the largest and the fastest growing simultaneously. And so, as you mentioned, there certainly is an opportunity there to reach more people, and we are endeavoring to do so. But I think if the younger people themselves can begin to share this information with one another, we'll have much greater success than those of us in the older demographics trying to reach back and connect with that generation.
A lot of that's fear-based too, right? Like a lot of their teachings, that just never resonated with me, right? Like I can remember being like 12 years old, and members of the church would be like, "Are you saved?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about? Am I saved? Like, have you accepted Jesus Christ as your savior?" Like, no. What does that mean? Like,
right.
That you have to do that. If you don't accept him, you're going to hell. Holy crap, I'm going to hell, and I haven't even done anything, right? Like, and then there's this concept of original sin. Like, what? Like, I mean, it's a lot of the concepts are based in fear, and it just never felt right for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and so that's part of the challenge, right? And to be honest, Trey, that impacts people for a really long time. When that sort of fear-based belief system becomes ingrained, it can become very troublesome for people, and it takes a long time to get beyond that for those that grew up in those traditions. But it certainly is fear-based. That's the tradition I grew up in, and just like you, it did not resonate with me, and that's what had me seeking. Look, it does fine and wonderful for lots of people in the world, but I also think there's a good majority of people that it doesn't resonate with, and so we're happy to be able to provide some alternative paths for folks that are interested.
Here's I've highlighted this recently, so I want to read this. This comes out of Emily Cady's book, Lessons in Truth. God is all good, always love. He never changes, no matter what we do or may have done. He is always trying to pour more of himself through us into visibility so as to make us grander, larger, fuller, freer individuals. Like that right there. Like, God is all good, always love. He's not judgmental. He's not sitting on a mountaintop in a white beard, judging you and all of your actions. He's always good. He's always love.
Yep. And so that's the idea, right? Is that this God or this universal power or whatever it is, it's a benevolent power and force. It is not a person. It's not, like you mentioned, some old man in the sky outside of us. It's really this energy that moves through all of us. And lots of people deeply believe that it is the force of love, plain and simple.
Mm-hmm. And then to just go on real quick, I know there's people have some stigmas behind the gender, but right behind that verse is this: while the child is crying out for its father, mother, God, the father, mother is yearning with infinite tenderness to satisfy the child. In the heart of man, a cry, in the heart of God, supply. What does that mean for you?
Well, so I'll give you a little bit of my personal history and story, right? So I mentioned I came from a lower middle class upbringing. And so fortunately, I had an undergrad degree. I was really interested in computer science, and I knew that was going to lead to a lucrative future for me. And so I became really enamored, since I didn't have it growing up, with this idea of material goods and, houses and cars and clothes and the finer things. And I was convinced that was the secret to happiness. And so I set goals for myself about certain income levels and what I wanted to achieve by the age of 30. And what I'll tell you is I achieved them. And not long after I turned 30 and had achieved those things, I still had this sense of emptiness, of yearning. And so that's when, fortunately, I met the young lady that I talked about, and I got on this path of seeking. And very relatively quickly, what I learned is what was missing was what you talked about. It was connecting with some truths that would fulfill me within. There's no material goods in the world that are going to heal us from the inside. We have to do that work ourselves. And whether we do it through teachings or self-awareness or self-acceptance, self-love, that work has to be done. And when you begin to do that, and when you get on a path to do that, it will completely change your life. And you will begin to feel more fulfilled by your inner world rather than the outer world. So that's what that means to me.
Beautiful. Jim Blake, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for writing this book. Thank you for taking the time. How can people find out more about you, and where can they buy the book?
So the book is available on Amazon. It's also there. I have a website that's dedicated to the book. It's iamjimblake.com. And you can find all sorts of information about the book, there's gems of wisdom at the end of each chapter as takeaways that are very practical. So that website has a lot of that information. And of course, if you want to learn more about, and you can also purchase it here, if you want to learn about unity and the teachings and the tools I mentioned, it's unity.org. And when you go to that website, it's not about our organization. It's not even really about the teachings. What you're going to find on that website is a set of tools and resources that you can directly apply to the everyday human experience. So you'll find articles and podcasts on grief, on healing, on prosperity, on end of life, on suddenly becoming a caregiver. So there's all sorts of spiritual tools and resources that deal with the practicalities of everyday life. And so I invite you to enjoy those at unity.org as well.
As the CEO of Unity, where do you envision you taking this philosophy, this set of ideas?
So what I will tell you, and there's tremendous opportunity that you alluded to earlier in the discussion. We talked about the fastest growing demographic in religion is the non-affiliated. And so we have basically architected a series of offerings, as you also talked about earlier. We have books, we have magazines, we have products and little tools and resources. There's loads of free content on our website. So what we're basically doing, Trey, is just grassroots connection. So we're using any number of those endpoints to reach into a particular area and meet new people, introduce them to that particular offering. And then once they become interested, we then begin to enlighten them as to the other offerings that are there. And so, initially someone might just be interested in prayer. And then later, as they become more sophisticated in their spiritual practice and move along their journey, they may be ready to consume something like Emily Cady, which is a pretty deep text in terms of spiritual principles. So we're just working very slowly and a lot of grassroots on social media and strategic partnerships to make new friends and introduce these teachings to them.
Fantastic. Jim, I can't thank you enough, sir. This has been awesome. I can't wait to do it next time.
All right. Thank you, brother. Good to be with you.